Hi, my name is Randall Germain, and I'm a professor in the Department of Political Science at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada. I want to speak to you here about newly modern IPE Insights from IPE at Mid-Century, which was published by the Review of International Studies and included among the Editor's Picks collection in 2021. This is an effort to explore the contribution to international political economy, or IPE, of a group of scholars who are not usually considered together as part of its disciplinary history. It's an exercise in intellectual history with the aim of drawing out the insights of scholars active in a period before we typically date the origins of IPE. There is, of course, a debate about this date, but for the most part, the consensus suggests that the field really coalesced at some point after 1970, which is conveniently marked by the publication of a seminal article by Susan Strange called International Economics and International Relations, the Case of Mutual Neglect. My contribution here is to show that an IPE-inflected debate already existed for several years up to and just after World War II among a clearly defined group of scholars who knew one another and engaged with themes and issues which we can recognize today as modern IPE. I make the claim that their writing provides insights both for the discipline and for what it studies, and that their work when considered as part of a collective endeavor, should be included in what I call the common heritage of IPE. This piece arose out of a work that I'm doing for a larger project, which I call IPE and the Problem of History. This too is an exercise in intellectual history, but on a larger scale. It's a manuscript that tries to make an argument for the relevance and vitality of a form of historical reasoning as a tradition of scholarship in IPE. It consists of chapters which showcase and interrogate key contributors to the common heritage of IPE, such as Adam Smith, Karl Marx, and Max Weber, as well as a number of 20th century participants in this tradition of scholarship. Among these are Karl Polanyi, E.H. Carr, and David Matrany, who provide the substantive core around which newly modern IPE is fashioned. The main argument I make in this article is that the intellectual basis for IPE was ready to take off after the Second World War, and that Polanyi, Carr, and Matrany provide the raw intellectual material for this takeoff. The heart of this piece really sketches out the remarkable coherence and congruence of these scholars' efforts to understand the nature of the crisis at work in the Great Depression, to understand the social forces that were unleashed by this crisis, and then to consider what all this meant for the future. When read together, I argue that their work provides an opening to what would later become important hallmarks of IPE scholarship. For example, they all agreed on the deep-seated and fundamental changes which Karl Polanyi called the Great Transformation. Not only this, but they also agreed on the major consequences of this transformation, namely to render inoperative the liberal tenets which underpinned most thinking about and policy towards political economy at the time. Equally, they all agreed on the international scale of this transformation and the demands for some form of planning as a necessary corrective to the collapse of liberal internationalism. How to consider the relationship of states to some form of international planning formed an integral feature of each of their analyses from the early 1930s through to the onset of the Cold War. Perhaps most importantly, they all considered the state to be the central institution of political economy. In different ways, transformation in world market economy all hinged on an expanded role which they believed the state was already playing after 1945. Polanyi, Carr, and Matrany understood that states, clearly most importantly led by the great powers, had been utterly transformed because of the New Deal in America, the 5-year plans in Russia, and the spread of these ideas worldwide, including, of course, to newly independent states. The signature transformation which they flagged was the emergence of what they called the service state, or what is more commonly today called a welfare state. The spread of social security in combination with mass industrialization and the advent of planning on a societal basis meant that national economies, as well as the global economy, were about to enter a new, more socialized and politicized era, one to which historical precedent no longer applied. Now, if I've convinced you of the possibility that these three authors were in fact engaged in a debate with clear IPE inflections, Are we entitled also to derive some insights from their conversations? I think so, and I want to highlight three. The first insight has a direct relevance to the field as it is currently constituted, which is that theoretical diversity is no impediment to robust debate and dialogue. Polanyi, Carr, and Matrani were influenced by very different theoretical traditions of thought. Marxism and socialism in the case of Polanyi, classical realism in the case of Carr, and what Matrani characterized for himself as Manchester Guardian liberalism. Yet they interacted and engaged with each other's work throughout this period. In fact, I argue that in their case, theoretical diversity enriched rather than impaired dialogue about the global political economy. And I take heart in this exemplar of how to conduct debate. There is hope for a pluralist engagement among IPE scholars even today. Another insight that I derive is that political mobilization is a central driver of change in the global political economy, especially where nationalist impulses are operative. All these authors were alert to the role of nationalism in world history and looked to harness it to positive effect. Their focus on political mobilization ensured that their analyses never lost sight of the role of human agency in the making of political economy. And finally, I highlight that each of our authors deployed a type of historical reasoning in their work, which I argue made them especially sensitive to disruptive and fundamental change in world political economy. This insight, of course, connects to my bigger research project, and to me it is very telling that nearly modern IPE also embraced a form of historical reasoning as a theoretical anchor for its research. Modern IP, unfortunately, has largely turned away from this, and I believe it has lost an important part of its intellectual toolkit in the process, which, of course, I wish to recover. But of course, we cannot simply dust off and reapply nearly modern IPE. There are silences and gaps in the scholarship, and we need to address them if we want to return to their ideas for inspiration. Among the silences I identify are the concerns of gender and race as constituent features of world political economy, while among the gaps I highlight is the role of knowledge in today's global economy. These themes were not a part of their work, and so we must adapt their ideas if we want to take advantage of them as part of the common heritage of IPE. I hope I have piqued your interest in nearly modern IPE, and I would like to close with a comment on the joys of research. I have spent many, many hours over the past several years looking through the papers of Carr and Matrani. For Polanyi, I had to rely on the impressive scholarship of Gareth Dale, who has authored a superb biography of his life. One of the real puzzles of this research was determining how often and how deeply these three individuals interacted over the period I examined. For example, Matrani employed Polanyi's wife as a research assistant at one point, although there is no record of any sustained contact between them. There's no physical record that I've found yet. But Matrani and Carr were both active members of Chatham House, a British foreign policy think tank. They would certainly have met during its functions and activities over the years, but finding evidence of this has proven to be very difficult. So you can imagine my elation when, in October 2019, just before the pandemic made archival research in different countries almost impossible, when I was in the Cadbury reading room at Birmingham University, which is where the Carr papers are kept, I came upon a series of entries in 1943 in Carr's cramped handwriting in his teeny tiny daily diaries, clearly marking when he met Matrani. This was catnip for archival nerds and confirmation that they did in fact meet to discuss their work on the coming shape of the post-war world. But archives are quiet places where whoops of joy are frowned upon. So I had to make do with a skyward glance to thank the archival gods for delivering gold to this lonely and tired but extremely grateful researcher. Scholarship has its rewards, and I'm delighted to share mine with you. Thank you very, very much.